Welcome back to the Centered in the City podcast. My name is Wade Brill, and I am so glad you are here. I'm so excited for you to listen to today's podcast episode because we have Dr. Richard Safir on as a guest who's going to talk to us about employee well-being and how, as a leadership team specifically, what you can be doing to create an atmosphere where people are practicing well being in digestible ways. Dr. Safir talks to us about how to make well being part of the culture, not just a box for everybody to be checking. Dr. Safir is a highly respected leader in workplace well being. He's been featured by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, as well as been quoted in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and Fortune magazine. He is also the author of Cure for the Common Company, a well-being prescription for a happier, healthier, and more resilient workplace. Dr. Safir also is the Chief Medical Director of Employee Health and Wellbeing at Johns Hopkins Medicine, where he leads the Healthy at Hopkins Employee Health and Wellbeing Strategy. I know you're going to learn so much from this episode, so let's settle in and let's get centered. Rich, welcome to the Center in the City podcast.
Thanks for having me, Wade. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, and what a timely conversation this is to talk about workplace well-being, as a lot of people are going to be heading back into the office, especially come the new year, as we're dealing with a lot of current events and hot topics. So I'm excited to dive in, and I'd love to kick us off by having you share with us, what does well-being mean to you?
Wade, it's interesting that you mention the workplace and the current events. I'll explain what well-being means to me in a minute, but I don't think most employers realize that their employees show up every day with their current events, some of which are shared in the community, some of which are shared across the nation, and some of which are just really personal within their own family unit. So yeah, we're showing up, and we're showing up in sometimes in not such good shape. And if an employer and managers were able to recognize that, we could probably help our employees feel more settled and able to focus and contribute to the overall effort. Okay, that's a little diversion, excuse me. Little plug for employers and managers to do their part in our overall solution.
Oh,
So
and we
well-being,
will get into that too. Yeah.
okay. You know, my well-being is feeling calm, cool, and connected. Um, that's what it's been defined for me this calendar year. Many years I'll make New Year's resolutions, but this year I adopted a positive affirmation phrase. I am calm, content, and connected. And those when I'm in that state, it feels great.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people can relate to when they're feeling calm, connected, and content, like that sense of like just ease takes over, and that's
Yeah.
what we want to be in. And sadly, I think most of the time we're not in those states, even though we strive to be in those states. And um, I'd love to hear a little bit about where you started to see a big need and a drive for your own work and your own research for making workplace well-being a priority.
So this goes back a long, a long time ago now. When I was in college, I studied nutrition, and when I was in medical school, I led a project. I recruited some colleagues, and collectively we went into elementary schools to do some basic nutrition education for heart health. Because when I was studying nutrition, I realized, gosh, why didn't we learn this when we were growing up? Because it would have been so much easier to have healthy habits had we been exposed when we were little kids. And so I was able to do something about that in medical school. So now fast forward, I'm a family doctor and I'm in my first year of practice. And after a year of seeing patients come in with many different chronic diseases, most of which would have been either better or never had occurred if they could have developed healthier eating habits as well as movement and not smoking. There I am again thinking, gosh, why aren't we as a community learning these skills earlier? And instead of me only having 15 minutes with my patients, I want to be able to have a bigger impact. And where can I get that done? Well, when they're done with me, they're going back to work and they're there for almost 2,000 hours a year. That's where I have been able to make a much larger impact, not just in nutrition, not just in movement, but in stress reduction and as of 5 or 6 years ago, mindfulness.
Yeah, I love that you emphasize that because I too never thought I would work with corporate clients. I thought, I want to work with people outside. Corporate's the enemy. And then I
Mm,
started to realize, you know what? My people are in corporate.
yeah,
They're spending 60 plus hours a week in their jobs, in their roles, and that is where their attention is. And so if you get to meet people where they are, exactly what you're saying,
yeah.
outside of those 10 minutes out of your office, yeah, it's in the workplace. And I think this circles back to why workplace well-being is so important and a corporate responsibility is that people are spending the majority of their time, attention, and energy in those spaces.
Yeah.
And we have to meet them where they are.
Oh, without a doubt. If we spend most of our waking hours working, we can't ignore those 8 or 10 hours. We can't just be well for the 2 or 3 hours before we go to bed. And the other reason not to ignore the workplace is that about 150 million or more Americans are insured by their employer. And frankly, it's not just in the employee's interest that they pay attention to their health and well-being during the workday. It's important for the employer as well.
Yeah, so let's talk about that because right now it's benefit season,
Hmm.
and a lot of people are re-enrolling or choosing healthcare
Yeah.
providers, or companies are selecting what benefits they're providing for their people in 2025. And I'd love to hear, like, what are some ways that employers can support their people outside of just the benefits? We talked about this a little bit before we hit record of how it's become very normal for a lot of companies to provide apps and try to make mindfulness
Yeah.
accessible in, 50% off of the subscription or that
Hmm.
subscription. But what are some other creative ways from a cultural perspective? And I think we can even get into more micro how employers can meet their employees and support their well-being.
Yeah, Wade, I've been in the employee health and well-being space for 25 years, so I've seen what works and what doesn't work. And, about 10 years ago, I came to the conclusion that if employers don't address the workplace culture, they will never be able to optimize the health and well-being of the people who work in that culture. And so, yeah, benefits are good, but they kind of pale in comparison to some of the key elements of a healthy and supportive workplace culture. Now, Wayne, in our workplace culture paradigm, there's six building blocks, and I'm not going to go through them all, but I'll just make some general statements. One is that relationships matter. Relationships with your peers, relationships with your teams, relationships with your managers, and your relationship to the employer. And the second main point I'll make about this paradigm is that we need to make it easier to have a healthy and well day, not harder. And that includes making it easier for us to be mindful throughout the day. And that goes beyond having an app on our phone that was either free or subsidized through our benefit plan.
I appreciate that invitation to really integrate it into the culture because a lot of us like know what we quote unquote should be doing, right? We know getting up and
Yeah.
taking walks, we know sitting isn't good for us, we know that taking these moments to pause and breathe
Hmm.
is really important. And yet people don't do it. You
That's
know,
right.
there's so much of this idea of like I need to be glued at my desk
That's right.
and feel kind of sucked into it, or the day will go by and people are like I didn't even drink enough water,
Hmm.
or I didn't eat lunch today, or whatever it might be. And I get the balance of being in a flow state and wanting to be in that flow state and to get that dopamine rush you feel when you're productive and you're crossing things off of your list. But at the same time, if we continue to override our human needs,
Hmm.
we like that is the road to burnout.
Yeah, I appreciate your optimism in thinking the reason why people don't stop to care for themselves is because they're in flow. I have maybe a little different
Yeah, tell me
perspective.
your perspective.
I am under the impression from what I see and what I read is that not enough people are in flow, and the reason why they don't stop for self-care is because they have a long list of to-dos, and they are have not yet developed a habit of prioritizing both their work and their well-being in tandem. And so, an employer who is intentional about how to build in, let's say, cues, is much more likely to see their employees practice self-care throughout the day than an employer who rests solely on the strategy of providing a benefit.
So tell me more about what those cues can look like
Hmm.
because I think there's a lot of wisdom in how to cultivate those cues
Yeah.
so that there's again more of that cultural conditioning of well-being versus we're just giving a benefit, or even we're just going to provide a one-off engagement and create this like care washing that happens in corporate culture. So I'd love to hear, tell us more about these
Yeah.
cues.
I always have like a tangent. It's possible that some employers are intentionally doing care washing, but I would also think that there's a good chunk of employers who are either naive or uninformed, and so they may think that they're actually doing well, but they're not, and for all the reasons that we've previously mentioned. So, Wade, your listening audience is not the average employee base, right? Your listeners are likely much more informed and much more likely to be practicing some form of mindfulness on a regular basis. So when we think about employers, I think we have to take ourselves out of the mindfulness community and put ourselves into more of an average community. And so I'm not even sure that the word mindfulness would resonate with the decision makers in an employer base. So you may want to choose a different phrase or word when we approach the challenge of helping a workforce. So stress reduction is much more commonly used and acceptable in the current vernacular. So just allow me to shift some of the words that we might use in this podcast usually. The other um, opportunity is to move towards a practice that we don't necessarily call mindfulness or meditation. So this is what we did at Hopkins. So you know that Hopkins is known for its, advanced research, our high level of care. We are not known for meditation and mindfulness, not yet. So when I approached the chief human resource officer several years ago, I didn't use mindfulness as a term. I used stress reduction. And when we ultimately decided to take our first step towards mindfulness, it was really positioned as helping our colleagues, our workforce, take a healthy breath during the day. We all need to breathe. It's free, it's portable, it doesn't have to take long. What a sales pitch, right? And so we started our strategic mindfulness approach at Johns Hopkins Medicine by introducing 478 breathing. Now, if you want to get into why we chose that one over the and others, that's fine. But
And let
I'll
me
just
just
say,
pause you there
yeah.
for a moment, Rich. Will you even explain for some listeners who might
Oh,
not
sure.
know what is 478 breath work?
Sure. It's a pattern of breathing where you breathe in through your nose for 4 seconds, you hold your breath for 7 seconds, and then you exhale through your mouth for 8 seconds. And you would repeat that pattern for 3 or 4 times. And Wade, we intentionally picked a breathing pattern that people could easily understand. Most people can count. Most people know what it's like to breathe through their nose, hold their breath, and breathe out through their mouth. So it's very doable. And on the other hand, it's sophisticated enough to make people think, not not to discredit any other breathing pattern, because believe me, there are others that could be just as effective. But for our population, we needed this balance. So the cue part or the intentionality part was how we introduced this idea and maintained the idea to be front of mind. And so what I'll share with you is just a few examples. I'm not sure I have the exhaustive list off the top of my head, but when we rolled out the process, we had screensavers on the clinical workstations. So if your monitor went to sleep, that was one of the messages you saw, and a figure in the message. Same figure and message was put on LED screens in the hallways of our facilities. The same figure and message was put onto these little laminated cards that are the same size as the ID badge. Your listeners can't see my ID badge. That's okay. Imagine it sits right behind your ID badge, and when you're in a building with secured doors, every time you go through one, you have to swipe your badge. Well, there's this other card that you need to move out of the way. And by the way, it's your 478 breathing card. Maybe it's time to take a breath, not right there in the doorway to cause a traffic jam, but maybe when you get to your next um, location, or maybe it's just that you do take a big deep breath in and out to just cleanse yourself. We also injected the 478 breathing pattern into new employee orientation to let them know, hey, your health and well-being is important to not only you, but it's important to us. And this is something as an institution that we believe in. Let's do it together. Don't just talk about it, actually do it. Same thing with new manager orientation. Big responsibilities. Don't forget to take care of yourself, because when you're happier and healthier, you're going to be a better leader. And by the way, this isn't that difficult for you to learn. So when you get comfortable, perhaps you'll lead your team in a 478 breathing practice. So Wade, there's a few other examples on my mind, but I think you're getting the drift of how this is not just left for one person to do by themselves. We have put nudges in place to make it much more likely that we engage.
Yeah, I love that emphasis on the cues being in physical locations, it being something
Mhm.
tangible around people's
Yeah.
badges, it being incorporated into onboarding trainings so that it's really being integrated into the culture instead of, we were mentioning this before I hit record too, instead of it just being, here's a meditation room, go take
Yeah.
yourself into the meditation room to chill out, which, it's great to have those accessible, but
Hmm.
we're also talking about how I think a lot of them have not been as successful as one had hoped they would be. Knowing this has probably been a gateway, right? This
Hmm.
idea
Yeah.
of being more intentional to your breath, taking these
Hmm.
pauses throughout the day. Has Johns Hopkins been able to collect any data around
Hmm.
how this small shift
Yeah.
in behavior change has maybe affected people's stress levels or affected how people
Hmm.
communicate or affected a sense of psychological safety and
Right.
belonging?
Right. So we started our 478 breathing strategy in 2017 or 2018. I can't remember. And it effectively opened the door to the idea that we could slow down long enough to take a healthy breathing practice, which then was an easy transition to this idea of being mindful. Now, in 2021, we hired our first certified mindfulness instructor. And so now it's been 3 years. And the data we've captured is around employee engagement and satisfaction. And that's been very valuable. We've seen a growing number of employees who are interested in practicing with Jen. We've seen a growing number of teams have Jen attend one of their events so they could do this together. Uh, Wade, it's pretty difficult to do a controlled study on people breathing. So, our goal is to help our employees build this into a practice, which is not just designated for a meditation room and not just for lunchtime. It's to really weave this throughout the day. So I think most of the listening audience can understand how we're not going to measure how many times a day people are doing this. What I would say is if it wasn't working, we wouldn't see the growing number of employees engaged in the more formal practices that we now have in place. And, sometimes we have to take our employees' feedback as the sign of success or failure. And we're getting great kudos for how we're supporting the workforce in this manner.
That's amazing, Rich. And yeah, it's so hard to track that data. And I know we all want
Yeah.
that data because
Yeah.
all of us in this field want to keep proving
Yeah.
how
Now,
important it
right.
is.
Now, it's not to say that we ignore data. So there are studies that are published in journals about mindfulness in the workplace. And I am grateful for those researchers who have engaged in that practice because we have drawn on your results in order to make the business case to have these services and resources in place. And it goes beyond the individual health and well being benefit. Wade, you know this when a team meditates together or is mindful together, if a larger workforce is mindful, we collaborate better. We're more creative. We build trust. We have greater employee engagement. We have greater employee retention. And when we all feel good about this collective practice, we become great marketers for our employer. It makes us more likely to recommend our place to work as one where you want to be. There's so many benefits, Wade, and we have to listen, it's a challenge enough to get to help people appreciate the value of mindfulness and then to teach them the skill. Then this idea of on top of that, getting employers to do their role. We're making progress, but we have some ways to go.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because creating those micro moments, or I,
Hmm.
I like to call them like mindful moments throughout the day, whether it's on your team of just doing a pulse check-in, what is everybody feeling,
Yeah.
thinking, doing,
Hmm.
right? So that people can orient, which I think is especially helpful in hybrid
Yeah.
teams or fully virtual teams.
Right.
But then everybody has a sense, like going back to what you shared in the beginning of this episode, like everybody's coming in with their own stressors and life events.
Yes.
And that's not necessarily apparent because we don't wear those all on our sleeve.
Yes.
And so bringing that in, a lot of people kind of, I think, are swinging to this place of the workplace has gotten a little too emotional, or there's some things that are too vulnerable for the workplace. Like we don't need to go there.
Hmm.
And I hear people and their experience. And at the same time, to your point of like, if we really understand what's happening, that your grandfather just passed away, or that your mom just got a cancer diagnosis, or you just had a divorce, or whatever it might be, that might affect your capacity to think
Yes.
critically or to be as creative or just to even have as much energy in a meeting. It's so important for us to understand, to whatever the extent people feel comfortable sharing, understand what each other are navigating, and not
Hmm.
because it's our responsibility to fix it,
Yeah.
but it helps us build that sense of empathy and compassion,
Yeah.
which we need to build more psychological safety
That's
and
right.
trust.
Yes, but someone has to step forward and lead in this manner. And it doesn't have to be the team manager. I mean, if any of your listeners are employed or are on a work team, you could be that person. If you share something about yourself, you're likely to give permission to somebody else who has wanted to share as well, but has been reluctant. Of course, you'll probably have already wanted to have built a trusting relationship. That's not like I'm endorsing anybody going out there and throwing personal information to someone you don't trust by any means, but it's possible that it's not normal on your work team to share personal information. I use the word normal purposefully because the root of normal is norm. So a norm is the expected and the accepted behavior of a group. And norms are powerful forces. If everybody gets up and goes to eat lunch at noon in the break room, there's a good chance you're going to go as well. That's the norm on the team. And if everybody sits at their desk and eats through lunch while working, that's another norm that doesn't work for us. And it's hard to be the thumb that sticks out because you don't want your boss to think you're the lazy one. Well, there's probably norms on teams related to how much we share about our personal life. And it's hard to swim against the current, but sometimes we need to if we want to see change.
Yeah, I love that invitation, and how much courage it takes and vulnerability it takes.
Yeah.
And, Brene Brown always talks about being that one to be able to stand in the arena. It takes
Hmm.
courage to be sticking up and being that voice or being that wave of change that we want to see. Again, everybody's at choice in their own comfort level. However, I think we can get really taken away by this idea of the masks we need to be wearing in the workplace, and like
Hmm.
how we should be showing up professionally, and what does it mean to be professional, and what,
Yeah.
and all of those things that I think can really hold people back from
Yeah.
fully exposing
Right.
themselves.
Right.
And I also get that it feels vulnerable
Uh-huh.
because I know from my private coaching clients, sometimes people feel like, well, if I share, period,
Yes.
or if I share, to what extent could it be used against me? Because there's
Uh-huh.
also this vulnerable feeling of,
Sure.
hey, employers care about me, but also they might fire me.
Everyone's got to weigh the situation. Absolutely. We also probably benefit by tiptoeing into the water and not diving in. We could also use the strategy of asking for permission. Hey, something happened with my family. Would you mind if I shared that with you? And they can say yes or no. And if they say yes, obviously it can make it easier. Does it guarantee that they wouldn't, talk behind your back? No. And so you'll quickly learn who you're going to trust and not trust, which is also good for your well-being because when we're not comfortable with the people we work with, it actually gives us this baseline elevated stress level. And that's not healthy. We need to feel comfortable with the people we work with if we want to optimize our health and well-being. And so we're either going to understand that this is someone we can trust, or if it's someone that we understand that we can't trust, that alone could be helpful information for you to adjust and not be left in this limbo position, which is possibly more stressful for you.
I appreciate you mentioning that around even just bringing in what's happening to our physiology in these
Hmm.
moments.
Yes.
And true, it's like if we also are feeling not safe and higher elevated stress levels around our coworkers, we're also not
Hmm.
going to be as motivated to do our work.
Yeah, we're not going to be motivated to collaborate. And when we collaborate, we can solve problems more quickly and we can solve them more collectively. We might even enjoy the process more. I mean, there's so many health and well-being benefits to getting along with our teammates. And in a world where much work is done through a computer, it is difficult sometimes to remember that we might be more effective when working with others, and it might also lead to better health and well-being.
Yeah, and something I think we're talking about here is another kind of cueing practice that we can
Hmm.
integrate into cultural well-beings, right? I talk about a lot of this with my corporate clients around relational mindfulness of how does it look and feel like to hold space for one another,
Hmm.
to with body language, with practicing training our attentions to be in the
Yeah,
present moment, not multitasking,
yeah,
to let our body languages even help each other know that it's safe or that this is a safe space or an open space. And, especially in this climate where it's, the political divisiveness is still very much here even after the election. And how do we hold space for the different types of perspectives that are out there? I think our capacity as a culture has even kind of shrunk our collective capacities to be with the uncomfortable. And so it's like even just learning how to grow that from a cultural perspective so that there is that sense of greater belonging wherever you are on belief spectrums.
yeah. I mean, if we can really embrace one of the core principles of mindfulness, which is staying present, then we wouldn't bring what we believe to be known about the person that we're talking with or having a relationship into the present. We would only be bringing the present into the conversation, which theoretically would help us be more tolerant and open and curious to the person that we're working with. It's when we draw on past experiences and future possibilities that I believe contributes to the challenge of being more present collectively.
Yeah. And what a practice that is for our
Hmm.
communication muscles
Yeah,
and for us to really engage that.
yeah.
As we step into the new year, which is crazy to think about it
Hmm.
being not so far away,
Right.
what advice would you give leaders? One thing they can be doing to create more of a space of well-being.
The one thing you could do question, which is always a challenging question. And during,
Everybody loves a good tip,
yeah,
a
well,
tool.
well, you asked the question, and during your question, I had like five things run through my head that were evolving as the question, kept going. So if we're really focused on the leader, then I would say as a leader, if you could focus on your own mental health, you would be a much happier person. You'd be more effective as a leader, and you'd also be supporting the mental health of the people you lead. Wade, you know that um, a mood contagion is real. And it's exponentially influential when the mood is coming from the boss. And most managers don't realize this. They're not aware of it. They're not staying present to understand what mood they're in before they talk with a team member or before they lead a meeting. So my one answer, Wade, is address your own mental health.
I love that, because it empowers the self to keep managing, self-management
Hmm.
and how that is so important to think about how we energetically are showing up into our spaces
Yeah.
and the mirror neurons of how that can so easily
Yes.
affect so many so
Hmm.
fast. Rich, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom and your insights. Where can people learn more about you and your work? And of course, I'll have your book
Sure.
linked in the show notes
Yeah.
as well.
So, Wade, I just want to thank you for bringing this topic of integrating mindfulness into the workday to your audience because it's something that I believe is necessary if we're going to optimize our health and well-being. And love to stay in touch with whomever is interested. I have a website, richardsafir.com. If you can spell my name correctly, you can find it. Wade, you did mention that I have a book, A Cure for the Common Company, but what crossed my mind, Wade, when after I gave the recommendation for managers to practice self-care, basically, is that I actually have a workday journal called A Cure for the Common Workday that is like a journal, but it has daily prompts for you to write in not only elements that improve your mental health, like what you're grateful for, but also to help you be thinking about how you're getting movement into your day, how you're socializing, your work-life balance, that your listeners might be interested in.
Amazing. What a helpful resource for people to use to
Yeah,
gain awareness, right? Because that's what we're really
right.
talking about is checking in with ourselves, being in the present moment of what's here. Thanks so much, Rich.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Center in the City podcast. I welcome you to let all of this goodness that was shared today just simmer in your mind, your body, your heart, and think about what's one takeaway you have that you want to integrate into your life. Whether that's you're a leader and you want to think about how you can personally show up in your meetings, in your one on ones, creating a space of well being with maybe body language or holding space and asking curious questions for your team members. Maybe you're an individual contributor and you feel inspired to practice 4-7-8 breath pattern throughout your day, maybe creating your own cues throughout your home office or physical office to have those friendly reminders to pause. Or maybe you're somebody who's inspired to bring more well being programming and initiatives into your workplace. Check out the great resources that Dr. Rich Saphir has, as well as feel free to reach out to me personally. And I'm always happy to be a thought partner in supporting you bringing well being into the places and spaces that you spend most of your time. Thanks for being here, as always. And until next time, stay centered.